We ready? All right, Dan, if you would please call roll.
Representative Berger,
Here.
Representative Nemec,
Here.
Representative Obermuller,
Excused.
Representative O'Hearn,
He will be here.
Representative Pendergraft,
Here.
Representative Smith,
Here.
Representative Stivar,
Present.
Representative Wiley,
Here.
Chairman Brown.
Here. All right, well, how comfortable you feel running the meeting here?
I'll try it.
Okay. All right, so we do have three bills today. I have the first bill up, so I'm going to turn this over to Representative Stivar to chair until Vice Chair O'Hearn comes in. And then we do have quite a bit of testimony, it looks like, for 120. We will do everything in our power to make sure that we hear everybody's testimony on 120 today. And then we also have Representative Henderson's bill up last, and I think there's quite a bit of testimony on that one as well. So I will just ask that keep comments brief if at all possible, and attempt not to repeat what somebody else has already said, so we can try to get through all three bills if at all possible. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Stivar. Representative Stivar, oh wait, you may not have to do this. Look at him,
Oh, good.
just in the nick of time. Mr. Vice Chair, I'm going to turn the table right on over to you, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Okay, House Bill 056, Purple Star Schools. Take it away, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Gentlemen, this is a very, very simple bill, but what I want to explain to you is the importance of this bill to my community in specifics, but also to the military in general. So something that many of you may not know, and the few returning members that we do have here may understand, is the Department of Defense typically goes back and looks at a whole bunch and a whole list of policies that are approved at the state legislative level on how military friendly we are as a state to military families, dependents, and also their students and medical. I mean, you name it, it's a whole list and a whole area of policy that they look at. Well, this particular bill was actually requested 2 years ago. And I went to the Department of Education to work on this bill 2 years ago and attempted to do this bill without actually going through legislation. And there were some states that were able to do it without legislation. And in my world, the less pages that we can have in the Green Book, the better. But unfortunately, after going through two different superintendents in the span of a very short time frame and two different chiefs of staff, it was determined that this was better suited to be in the Green Books and provide the statutory authority for school districts to provide what they're actually going to be laying out in this bill. So ultimately, what does this bill do? This bill is a very, very permissive bill. It does not require anybody to do anything, but it does give us a little notch in the win column with the Department of Defense for those amazing policy areas that we need to be showing that we are military friendly. So when we get our new missiles here in the southwestern or southeastern part of the state, we can show the Department of Defense that Wyoming truly does care about its service members, as well as anybody else that's going to be coming in here to help support that particular area. So what does this bill do? This bill provides a framework that allows individual school districts to provide individual schools a Purple Star designation. That Purple Star designation basically says that you are going to set up the availability for schools to have a single point person that will handle all transitions to all military families. They will provide all the recognition that needs to be done with the military. So if you go in through the bill, if you haven't read it yet, which I'm hoping the whole committee has at this point, but you have student awards that can be done. The school district can also provide information. So if you go to page 2, it says have a staff member that would be designated as military liaison who would specifically identify military connected students enrolled at the school, serve as that point of contact, as I mentioned, assist in developing and coordinating appropriate services and programs relevant to military connected students, Maintain on the school website easily accessible information that includes resources for military-connected students and their families. And it would also have the information on how to do relocation, enrollment, academic planning, counseling, and other support services, and the contact and information of this particular individual. Underneath that, we would also offer professional development for staff members on issues. So one of the biggest things that we have here is these students are moving every 2 to 3 years. And having teachers be aware of what's going on, and that professional development is a crucial piece to making sure that our students are able to transfer in and out of our community with ease. And then when you see on line 6 on page 4, they would have one of the following that would be required. And this is the requirement to become a Purple Star program or Purple Star school. They would have a resolution adopted by the Board of Trustees showing support for the military connected students, which my honest opinion is exactly what this community would do. I don't think this would be a school by school process necessarily, but I do believe that the entire school board would be interested in doing this. You can provide recognition of the month for a military child or family with relevant events hosted by the school. Can partner with local military installation that provides opportunities for active duty military members to volunteer at the school, speak at a school assembly, or even host a field trip, which I know they've done that multiple times as well. And then the last thing that you see here is a school may partner with the school district as necessary to comply with this particular law. Again, Mr. Vice Chairman, this is a fairly simple bill. It's a permissive bill allowing the school district and schools to be designated as a Purple Star school, allows us to show our appreciation for our military families and their students, and making sure that we are providing every tool in our belt possible to make sure that they have a smooth and easy transition into our community. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative Berger.
Thanks, Mr. Vice Chairman.
You bet.
Chairman Brown, is there anything in the bill here? I didn't think making of a banner that's a purple. Do we have a design of a banner that could be hung in a school?
Mr. Vice Chairman, Representative Berger, I'm sure that they have some information on this, and you will actually hear, I believe she was at least on the list, and I think she'll still be here. We have a representative from the Department of Defense that will explain what she has seen in other states. But I am very optimistic that there's something out there that's already been designated. But to the idea that it would be a banner or what that would look like, I don't know for sure.
Follow up? Any other questions? I have one. Page 4, line 6, offer professional development for the staff members on issues related to the military connected students. What does that look like?
Mr. Chairman, there's a whole bunch of, there's a whole litany of things that could occur with that, but I would tend to believe that there's probably brighter and smarter people behind me that may testify on behalf of this that would be able to answer that in a more concise effort. But ultimately what that is kind of going back to my opening testimony, that we have the opportunity here for teachers to learn about the impacts that moving so often has on children. And, it may only be a half-hour course, maybe an hour-long course in these professional development timeframes that these teachers have to understand what these kids go through. And so these point of contacts would be able to develop these professional development courses and teach them to the teachers and allow them to understand what the impacts are for these students moving around the country on a regular basis.
And that was the military liaison you were kind of mentioning earlier?
Correct,
That would
Mr.
come in?
Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Brown, thank you for bringing this bill. I need you to understand that my background is a child of the 60s during the Vietnam War. And I attended public schools that had staff predominantly very much opposed to that conflict and not particularly friendly toward the military. And so while I appreciate what you're trying to do here, what I think you're trying to do, I have some questions on page 2, line 14. Have a staff member designated as a military liaison. Is there any consideration? I know you said there was some training. Is there any consideration perhaps to altering that or looking over on page 4, lines 20 and 21 provides opportunity for active duty military members to volunteer at the school? is it a possibility in your mind that this might be amended to perhaps maybe add a little balance?
Chairman Brown?
Mr. Vice Chairman, Representative Pendergraft, can I ask you to maybe rephrase your question as to what you mean by balance?
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Brown. It seems to me that if we leave one liaison, that may be what I might deem a good person or on the proper side. And then in another school, there might be someone assigned to that position because of the staff that maybe what I would think of has some nefarious or some negative attitudes toward there. I just would like some balance in this so that neither one side nor the other has the opportunity to be over influencing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Brown?
Mr. Vice Chairman, Representative Pendergraft, thank you for the clarification on that. I would suspect that you will probably have more than one, right? This is the floor. It's a requirement to have at least one individual that would be taking care of this. But I also think that this would probably be other duties as assigned. And I don't believe this would be something that somebody is just forced to handle. I believe that this would be something that somebody would volunteer for, which means that they would tend to have the understanding of what the military goes through and have a belief system that aligns with what we're trying to do with this particular bill. That would be my suspicion. Granted, that's what we practice with theory, but in practicum, it may not be that way. So I recognize what you're saying. I think that if we continue with this bill and this bill were to make it through the process, if we were to hear issues with that, I would be more than happy to come back through. The language that you see in this particular bill is what has been passed by the other states that have this similar program. This is very boilerplate. So if you're interested in amending it to provide that, I'm certainly open to that. But I do think that what we've seen so far in other states that have adopted the same program, this has shown to be effective.
Okay, follow up.
Follow up?
One last question at this point. Page 3, line 17. Counseling and other support services are available for military-connected students. Who provides that counseling? Who are the counselors? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Brown?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, Representative Pendergraft, that would be the current counselors that are located in the school and or throughout the district. Not every school is going to have a school psychologist or anything along those lines, but these would be the people that are already in that job. This would just be, again, ensuring that those students do have the ease of access to these locations or to these people, and that there's a clear line between them. It's not blurry. There's no indication as to who do I go to, who do I turn to, that those parents and those children would be able to know exactly who they need to turn to for those services.
Representative Stivar has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment for Representative Pendergraft and you, Chairman. There's a lot of school teachers out there that are prior service military. And that's who I think they'd pick or they'd volunteer to be the military staff member to do the liaison because they're familiar with the program. So just a comment.
Mr. Chairman, I agree.
Okay. I see we have a couple of departments here that might want to speak about this. If there's no further questions for Chairman Brown. General Porter? Okay, come on up.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Wanda Maloney, and I am the Chief Policy Officer at the Wyoming Department of Education. And I'm also here with a colleague, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Mr. Vice Chair, I'm Robin Grandpré. I'm with the Wyoming Department of Education as well. I'm the Teacher of the Year coordinator and do a lot of other awards for the department as well.
Congratulations.
Mr. Vice Chair, I would like to just bring to your attention that the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Megan Degenfolder, is extremely supportive of this Purple Star program and the work that it does to recognize those schools and the support that it provides for our students as they transition into the community. I would also just like to provide an update on the work that the department has stood up to support the Purple Star program. And I would call out Robin Grand Prix and Ken Reynolds. Ken Reynolds serves in the department, and he also has military experience. And they have stood up a work group, and that work group has already developed an application for schools to apply for. And many of the components within that application align directly to the components within this bill. And having done that, we have 2 schools that have filled out the application. We're doing a pilot program, and those 2 schools are Freedom Elementary and McCormick Junior High. They have been designated that Purple Star responsibility or designation, and we will be able to launch at the Rotunda a celebration and launching that statewide. So I just wanted to open that up and let you know that the department is committed to carrying this work forward.
Committee, any questions? I have one. The 2 schools that you mentioned, how many students are there in this Cheyenne area that it would seem that there's more than 2 schools that would have transitioning students in them? And I'm just wondering, why are those the only 2 schools that have put in for the Purple Star program? Thank you.
I'm going to turn that over to my colleague to support with that answer.
Mr. Vice Chair, as Wanda mentioned, this was the pilot program. So while we were kind of figuring out what the application should look like and what the requirements should be for Wyoming versus other states, we really just worked with those 2 schools as we knew they were already doing most of the things that we were requiring. So this was the pilot program. So they went through the pilot, filled out the application, gave us all the necessary information, and then were awarded. So as Wanda mentioned this earlier as well, we'll be launching statewide this Thursday. So as of Thursday, we'll be opening it to the entire state to support the other military connected students.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions for the Department of Education?
Mr. Vice Chair, if I could, there was a couple questions earlier that I believe I could answer for you, if you don't mind.
I do not mind at all,
All
thank you.
right, thank you very much. So you asked about the professional development. So the Wyoming Department of Education has stood up a virtual online course in our Canvas course online so that anybody can go through our professional development. There's also a Military Child Education Coalition that has student-to-student or S2S professional development courses that they could take as well. They would just need to provide us their certificate of either of those courses when applying for the Purple Star. And then in addition, you mentioned, somebody asked about the branding of what the banners would look like. We do have a little logo is not the right word, but there's a little branding that we have for all of the schools that would get that. We have for our first 2 Purple Star schools, we do have a plaque with the logo on it and all those kind of things as well.
Thank you. I assume the banner would be purple?
It is purple,
So
and I
the
have it on my
Vikings- so the
screen if you
Vikings
want
would
to
come to
see
town?
it. Yeah, I could
Okay.
sort of show you what it looks like.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Anybody else want to speak? I think we have one online. Ms. Perot. Okay, come forward, please.
Thank you, committee, for hearing me today. My name is Amber Leba, and I'm the Vice President of the Greater Cheyenne Chamber of Commerce. And I just wanted to let you know that we are very big supporters of this bill. I'm not going to repeat a lot of what's been said already of why we support this bill. I just wanted to add that myself being a military child, I believe that if this program was in place in the schools that I had been moved to, I think it would have just made my transition a little bit easier. Kids are resilient, but at the same time, it's scary. It's very scary being transplanted from one community to a next, not knowing anybody, not knowing the adults in your school. So if they just had that one person that they knew that they could go to ask questions, to help with anything that they needed, I think that would be a really big pro. So I just wanted to ask you guys to please support this bill.
Thank you very much. Any questions, Ms. LeVay? Seeing none?
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, I'm Sublette County.
30 years active duty in the Navy. That means 19 moves. The good news is only 7 of them occurred when I had my children came along. Military families, and particularly children, can be quite resilient. I recall well when I was in Omaha, Nebraska. It was January and appropriately cold in Omaha. I found out we were going to the island of Guam. My youngest son at that point, second grade, looked at me, looked at my wife, and he says, "When we get there, can I go swimming on Christmas Day?" Well, yeah, I'm ready. So, military kids work it out. And, but another piece of that is military families network. They call each other. I remember when we were leaving the island of Guam, coming back to the Seattle Puget Sound area, my wife got on the phone, talked about schools, other things, Boy Scouts, soccer, whatever. And so reputations make a difference to military families. And so they'll talk about the schools here in Cheyenne and Wyoming in general. And remember, there are military folks in other places, recruiters and things like that, far and wide in the state, some of them on nearly independent duty. But there's another perspective too, which is the families will talk about the quality of the schools. When I was out on Guam, Department of Defense had an arrangement with the Guam public school system where they funded the school system on the order of $100,000 a year for taking care of military families in lieu of establishing a DoD school system there. My wife and I were not happy with the school system. By the beginning of our second year there, we had put our oldest high schooler in a Catholic parochial school, and she was homeschooling our younger two. And on departing, heading back to the States with the ship, the USS Holland. And Holland was, by the way, the biggest individual command on the island at that time, the mid-90s, crew of 13 to 1,500. I wrote a letter about the Guam public school system. I wasn't happy. The upshot of that letter was real simple. Department of Defense established a DoD school system and pulled military kids out of the Guam public school system. That's not going to happen in the continental United States. There are laws that prohibit DoD school systems in our nation. Nevertheless, the point about networking and reputation makes a difference, and I see this as a tool to helping our school systems take care of military families and their children. And so I'm a very strong supporter of it, and subject to your questions, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winnie. Any questions for Mr. Winnie? Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And committee, I am a supporter of this. So you see I'm signed on the bill. Let me give you a little background. I too am retired military, over 26 years. And for the last few years, I've served as the liaison to the NCSL Veterans and Military Affairs Task Force. We had a meeting up in the northwest part of the country a few months back. This was a big subject, not just in Wyoming, but across the country, relative to how the young people transferring in to new schools have an opportunity to integrate, to transition the right way, the way you would want to, if you were one of them, right? And so what this is an opportunity for us to show as a state legislature that we get it, right? Alongside of that, for many years, Wyoming's been a member of an interstate compact for students of military families. I served on that for my first 2 terms, both as an alternate and as a member. And I urge you, if you have military background, you maybe consider that for one of the committees you might be interested in during this term. But this involves a lot of things, not just grades and transcripts or trouble graduating or those kind of things. It also provides a point of contact in the school system for the family, to call and contact if there's a question, but also to help alert people to the potential of problems. I just urge positive consideration of this, move it forward. Any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer.
Thank you, Representative Henderson. Any questions? Okay, let's take the online caller if she's ready. She's dropped off? Okay. Anybody else in the room that wants to speak on this bill? House Bill 56, excuse me. Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sarah Bieber. We live in Casper, Wyoming. I am a military wife and I have 2 kids. We were Air Force for 15 years. That included 3 different moves. Thank you for listening to me today. I just have kind of a couple questions. Is there going to be an opt-in option? So we lived in California, and I was not fond of the Purple Star schools in California, even though they were Purple Star. I had concerns, and so I obviously went outside of those Purple Star schools and looked at private schools, and then ended up homeschooling a little bit. Are all of the kids that are registered military kids going to be funneled into this, or is it an opt-in, opt-out option?
Thank you, Ms. Bieber. Chairman Brown, do you know?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Ms. Bieber, this is actually not a requirement in any way, shape, or form for any student. This is a permissive bill that allows schools and school districts to authorize the program and to become Purple Star schools. So there's nothing forcing or requiring at this point for students. It just gives the students that are moving in the opportunity to recognize the Purple Star schools that are in the state.
Okay, and then my other kind of comment was, are private schools able to apply for Purple Star status?
I'm seeing some head moving in the back that says they are.
Okay, great. I just, as a parent, like to be able to be involved and have control over, what's happening with my kiddos' education. And I'm fairly indifferent on the bill. I do appreciate the military recognition and how hard that can be, especially for our kids coming and going from schools. So thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you, Ms. Bieber. Do we have anybody else online? Okay. Committee, what's your preference?
Second.
Moved by Stivar, second by Berger. Question being called. Roll call, please.
Okay, Representative Berger,
Aye.
Representative Nemec,
Aye.
Representative Obermueller, Representative O'Hearn,
Aye.
Representative Pendergraft,
Aye.
Representative Smith,
Aye.
Representative Stivar,
Aye.
Representative Wiley,
Aye.
Chairman Brown.
Aye.
That's 9 ayes, do pass.
Who wants to carry this? No, I'm just kidding, committee. I'll take it. All right. Thank you, Vice Chairman, for taking the reins there. Next bill up for our consideration is House Bill 120. Chairman Zwanitzer. Chairman Zwanitzer, we'll give the floor over to you. Please explain House Bill 120 for us.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Transportation Committee. I decided this year to bring one non-controversial bill with a whole lot of good co-sponsors that would easily get through the process. So thank you for voting for House Bill 76 this morning on Committee of the Whole. Today, to your committee, I bring you House Bill 120, Traffic Stops Probable Cause. Certainly, slightly more controversial than most of my other bills. So let me just give you some background, committee. About 5 years ago, my roommate was pulled over in Pinedale. Had this interesting story where the police officer had asked him to leave the car and sit in the patrol car with him and asked him a multitude of questions. And he just thought it was the most odd thing he'd heard of. And I agreed, that was odd. Then it happened to another friend of mine 2 years ago in Laramie County. Heard the same kind of story, weird questions from the police officer, talking to some other people. It had happened to several others of my friends. And then finally this August, my own son was pulled over in Albany County. And after hearing his story, I decided, we're going a bit too far with how this is working with our law enforcement community. So I did draft House Bill 120. It's a short bill, certainly has some significant ramifications, as I'm sure you're all aware. because I'm confident you've heard from the law enforcement community and others on the bill. But quickly walking through what the bill does, it didn't say it eliminates, but if an officer asks you to get out of your vehicle and join them in their vehicle to further ask you questions, it ultimately says that any kind of information they glean from you can't be used against you, in violation of your Fourth Amendment rights. And so quickly on page 2, there are some provisions, right, that the police officer has to have probable cause that you're committing or fleeing a crime or imprisonment. It has to be a crime that would be, a felony level, an imprisonable crime. Obviously, you've probably committed a traffic infraction, which is a crime. Then in Romanet 2, if they've been notified of a search warrant. Romanet 3, if you've committed a crime outside of the state. And then obviously kind of a catch-all in Romanet 4, that if you're in immediate danger, bodily harm from someone else in the vehicle, the car's on fire, any number of things that police officer who would have reasonable belief that your life is in danger can get you out of that car without violating this section. And then, I guess the catch-all of the bill is there in B on bottom of page 2, top of line 3, that any information they get from you as part of that questioning can't be used against you. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the bill. I do think in many cases, from what I've heard, and I have had some law enforcement people contact me and say, in some cases, this is now part of standard training, right? That a law enforcement officer does have the possibility and in some cases, the reasonable suspicion that they should have you out of your vehicle for all sorts of safety reasons, you and your passenger safety. And that, it's law enforcement's prerogative to continue to ask you probing questions. In some cases, they believe they have suspicion that you may have committed further crimes to see if you will incriminate yourself. I certainly appreciate our law enforcement and the good work they do, but I think there is a point where we've probably crossed the line in some of this realm. And so that's why I'm bringing the issue to you today. You will see an amendment with my name on it that I hope was passed out that does change the wording from exit the vehicle to entering a police vehicle. And so as I reviewed and talked to people about what other states do, it is certainly in the prerogative of law enforcement to ask you or tell you to exit your vehicle. I think some of the difficulty is when they invite you to join them in their vehicle, especially when they say something like, well, I need to run your plates. How about you just come join me, right? Most people, are trying to get out of a ticket perhaps, feel there's an intimidation factor there. And so there is an amendment, if it makes the bill any more palatable, I doubt it does to the people behind me, that would say it's not proper for them to be invited into your police vehicle. I do feel there's an interest in disconnect. It's cold in Wyoming, right? They let you out of your vehicle and you can't get back in. Their vehicle is probably the next warmest thing on the interstate. So I know the bill is not without controversy or issues, and I think you'll hear a lot of good reasons why in some cases it's proper to pull somebody out of their vehicle. But I do think philosophically, some of the happenings that I've heard about, including the members of our own body and my child, go further than what I would expect law enforcement to be allowed to do in these probing questions. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman or committee. Otherwise, there's some people here to testify for and against the bill, certainly behind me.
Thank you, Chairman Zwanitzer. Any questions for Chairman Zwanitzer? No questions? You're off the hook. All right. I'm going to go ahead and open this up to elected officials that we have in the room. If there's any elected officials, I see Representative Andrew coming forward. If there's anybody else that would like to speak, please go ahead and come up to the microphones. Representative Andrew, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I co-sponsored this bill because the issue that it addresses actually happened to me in Albany County. I was pulled over and the officer wanted to run my plates, so he asked me to join him in the car. And when I got in the car, he started to actually ask me a lot of questions regarding a different traffic stop that I was not involved in that involved someone I knew. So I felt like, I was no longer being detained for the traffic stop at hand, but rather being detained so he could ask questions about a totally unrelated issue. And, I have great respect for the work our law enforcement do, but we're all human. We all can make mistakes. And I think this is a good bill because it definitely prevents one particular mistake from happening. And I would encourage the committee to, listen to all the testimony, and maybe there's a few more things you could add to this list in terms of exemptions that would make it a little more palatable. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for Representative Andrew? Representative Stivar.
Hey, Mr. Chairman. Representative Andrews, why didn't you just plead the fifth?
Representative Andrew.
That's a good question, but it seemed like at the time I was in a police car and I felt pressure to answer the questions.
Representative Pendergraft.
So, Mr. Chairman, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. Representative Andrew, I'm looking at the text as amended now. If I look at page 1, line 13, I'll go back to line 12. A peace officer as identified by Wyoming statute, etc., shall not request that the driver or occupant of a vehicle enter a police vehicle during a traffic stop unless, and it goes on and gives the exceptions. We mentioned the cold. Is that included in the imminent harm to the driver? Just curious. Thank you.
Representative Andrew.
Mr. Chairman, perhaps you could put something in here that they could suggest that is an option, but specify that it's not required.
Follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The follow-up then being, do I understand right that if someone does get into a police vehicle, that the evidence collected may be more substantial? Would it be appropriate for an officer to tell the person, look, you can get inside of the vehicle to stay warm, but you don't have to answer any questions?
Representative Andrew.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's maybe something for the committee to deal with if you want that exception to be there, for it to be provided as an option to stay warm. In most of these cases, I don't see why the person can't just stay in their own warm vehicle. And I think a lot of exceptions are provided for if we need an exemption from that. And so, thank you.
Any further questions? All right, thank you, Representative Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead and open this up to any agencies. So I see the Highway Patrol as well as Cheyenne PD, and looks like LCSO is here. So we'll go ahead and open it up to the agencies. Colonel, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself. Lieutenant Colonel. Lieutenant.
Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Colonel Tim Cameron. I'm the administrator of the Wyoming Highway Patrol. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today. The patrol has serious concerns about the limitations that this bill poses. So understanding the need for brevity, I'd like to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Josh Wathauer to provide you some other basis. And then we brought with us today Lieutenant Fry, who can speak specific to traffic stops. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel. Lieutenant Colonel.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Josh Walther, Lieutenant Colonel for the Wyoming Highway Patrol. And before we turn this over to our resident expert who's never testified, so go easy on him, please. Just want to make a few opening comments. We do try to wrap our head around any bill that's proposed and really understand it from different perspectives. Of course, in our leadership positions, it's our responsibility to try to recommend and request and testify to what we think is the best thing for our agency in terms of our mission, taking care of the public we serve, while also taking care of our folks and helping them be safe and do the most effective job they can. We are struggling to see the benefit in this bill and some issues that it causes. Just want to point out a couple things. We don't bring everyone back to our vehicles. It's not uncommon that we bring folks back for various reasons, which I'll mention here in just a minute. But this bill is really detrimental to highway safety, to what we try to do for our jobs and our careers, and taking bad people off the road, and doing investigations, and then really just highway safety and law enforcement safety. There's a lot of special people in law enforcement. It's becoming fewer and fewer that are interested in this profession. And unfortunately, it's bills like these that make it, make folks want to shy away from it because it is a special group and it makes it hard for them to do their jobs. Some of the most impactful conversations I've ever had in my career, and I know a lot of folks in this career have had, are when people are sitting back in your car and you're working through the process with them. You're talking about, here's a violation that occurred. It's not just a robotic movement where you walk up to the car and say, here's your violation. I'm gonna write you a ticket. I'll be back in a few minutes. We try to engage. Our goal is officer safety. Our goal is public safety. And so when we bring folks back, we determine what's the best way to impact someone. What's the best way to, when I leave this stop, they don't do it again, right? And so not always writing a ticket is how you do that. Sometimes it's a warning. Sometimes it's an education. Sometimes it's bringing them back to your car and having the conversation. And this takes that away, unless you have probable cause, which has been mentioned. Yes, sometimes that conversation leads to additional violations found and even arrests. And that should be okay. That's how you discover these things. We all know this is Wyoming. The wind blows 70 miles an hour. It snows. There's various reasons why you bring folks back aside from just investigating things further. Without getting too into the weeds, I'll just list a few reasons why we bring folks back, give you a couple stats, and then I'll turn it over to the lieutenant here. But I just listed maybe 7 or 8 reasons that just for your consideration. I just mentioned it's windy and it's snowy. We have body cameras now with mics built into them. That is our mic. Our body cameras are mic. So when you're standing out roadside, the wind's blowing 70 miles an hour, it's snowing or whatever, you can't hear. So if there's further questions to be had, if folks are still fishing around for their insurance and registration, whatever, we may say, see if you can find that and then come back to the car and we'll finish up the stop. We have more cameras in the car. We have 4 cameras in the car and 1 body camera. So as you know, we like to protect what we're doing. All of us, for the most part, like everything to be filmed now. So if there are any accusations, it's filmed. So there's more camera there, more protection for us and for the person that we're stopping. Safety. We can move our car quicker with someone in it. If we see someone coming up behind us, which has happened before, which you guys are all aware of, we can get our car out of the way quicker with the driver in our car. Whereas if they're in their car, we essentially sacrifice ourselves. And we all know that's something we have to do. We have to sit there, let the car hit us so it doesn't hit them. Child trafficking is a big one that touches me pretty deeply. Child trafficking, there's no way you can interdict a child trafficking stop without pulling someone out of the car. There's a child in the car, right? And we're trying to determine if there's child trafficking going on. You just want to ask a few questions, but you need to separate people to see if their stories jive or whatever it is. Sometimes it's completely simple and easy and innocent, but it takes a few questions to get to that. We smell alcohol. You walk up to the car, there's 5 people in the car, you smell alcohol. Okay, you don't know if it's coming from the driver or one of the 5 passengers. You just want to pull them out, write them a warning, but see, is it coming from you or someone else? You can't do that because you don't have probable cause. We can't do SFST, so standardized field sobriety tests. If we do suspect someone may be under the influence, we can't ask them to come out because we don't have probable cause yet. That's a nationwide standard. That's something that all of us do in law enforcement. You pull them out to do further tests, right? And determine if they're under the influence. One more reason I'll give you, just there's several, is a crash. Folks are in a crash, and typically it's because of foul weather, most often. And so we have a lot of questions to ask folks when there's a crash report. Their name, their registration, where they're going, where they're wearing a seatbelt, all that stuff that takes quite a bit to complete. We're not going to stand roadside and do that. We almost always bring folks back to our car. If there's no injuries, obviously if there's injuries, they're going in an ambulance to the hospital. And then we show up there and do the interview with them. But we can't do that because there's no probable cause to bring someone back to our patrol car. I heard the amendment, and just speak to that real quick before I give you a couple of stats. It's not about asking someone to get out of their car and just do this roadside. I mean, sometimes that may be a little safer. Hey, let's go in the borrow pit. We're in a weird spot here. That way we don't get run into. But you really want to bring people back to where you can both just sit down and relax. You can complete your paperwork, your warning, or whatever you're doing, and ask questions. It's not about just pulling them out of the car and bringing them to the roadside. That's our office, essentially. And so that's why one of the main reasons we do that. We stop over 100,000 cars a year. And for various reasons, from minor traffic violations to ready reports to warrants, whatever it may be. We work typically 5,000 crashes per year. Out of those 5,000 crashes, we typically have 700 to 800 which involve impaired driving. Of those 700 or 800 that are involving impaired driving, to me, that means we missed them. Okay, they're involved in a crash. We have almost that many arrests every year. So with that many arrests, we have that many that we've missed. And we don't find this out. We don't get this by having a bill like this to where we can't even pull people out of their cars to investigate a DUI. So anyway, it severely limits our ability to look into what's going on and interact with folks on a more personal level. So with that, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Fry.
Any questions for Lieutenant Colonel at this point? Representative Berger?
Question. You see anywhere in this bill that would maybe prohibit you guys to provide other services to the community? For instance, when the Special Olympics comes into town and we want to take them through town from their state event and asking them to come in your vehicle or shop with a cop, would this bill prevent that? That's one question I did ask the bringer of the bill, and I want to know if you maybe see something, the potential, or it will, is this from those kids getting into your vehicles?
Lieutenant Colonel?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Berger, absolutely. I mean, I can't say that that was the intent and the spirit of this. I'm not the author, but I certainly see a lot of implications with this, a lot of issues that may arise that we're not even thinking of.
I would also say if you just going back to this particular line on page 1, it says during a traffic stop. So I think most of your concerns would be there, but there's always unintended consequences. Any other questions, Representative Obermiller?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Currently, are there any internal rules or accepted practices that relate to sidebars regarding subject matter that could be brought up once a person is in your vehicle, or is it totally open-ended?
Lieutenant Colonel?
And Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermuller, we do have policies on this, but obviously if they're sitting in a car and we're just having conversation, we haven't read Miranda, we don't have probable cause, we're really just asking questions. Where you're traveling to, where you're coming from, things like that, to see if there's anything additional there. So we do have a traffic stops policy, but in terms of this and just bringing people back to their car without probable cause yet, it's pretty wide open. The conversation you can have is pretty wide open, but we do have policy limited to, you should really just be talking about travel plans, the reason for the stop, not talking about, personal things or things that aren't related to the traffic stop.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Representative Berger?
Thanks. One more question. Appreciate you. Do you feel that officers use getting into their vehicle as an intimidation? Do you think yes, no, maybe,
Lieutenant Colonel?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Berger, I've been doing this for nearly 20 years and I've never had a conversation with any law enforcement who felt like they put someone in their vehicle for intimidation. I personally have never done that. In fact, it's just the opposite. To show them the personal side of you, to try to relate. We're all humans trying to do a job, and you're trying to relate to them, hey, here's why this is a safety concern. Let's talk about it.
Okay. Any further questions for the Lieutenant Colonel before we move on to Lieutenant? All right, Lieutenant Fry. We promise not to go after you too hard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Andy Fry. I'm a lieutenant with the Highway Patrol and an instructor at our academy. At our academy, I teach a course on traffic stops, which includes officer safety considerations, tactics, communication strategies, and applicable case law. Through that lens, I reviewed House Bill 120 at the request of the Lieutenant Colonel. House Bill 120 would hinder DUI enforcement in the state of Wyoming, undermine investigations into human, narcotics, and sex trafficking, hamper the effectiveness of domestic abuse investigations, and diminish officer safety. The removal of occupants from a vehicle for investigative and/or officer safety purposes is a core tenet of law enforcement practices and was granted and has been upheld by the United States Supreme Court and various lower courts through assorted cases across different decades. The courts have repeatedly ruled that the removal of occupants on a legal traffic stop is a minimal intrusion into their personal liberty, and it is far outweighed by the requisite benefit and increase in officer safety. Under House Bill 120, law enforcement cannot have a driver exit a vehicle. I understand this will change some with the amendment, which we just found out about. But under House Bill 120, law enforcement cannot have a driver exit a vehicle to perform standardized field sobriety tests for a DUI investigation. Under this bill, a law enforcement officer cannot have occupants exit a vehicle if he or she suspects a sex trafficking crime is taking place. This law makes it more difficult for law enforcement to do some of the most basic tasks that the public expects of us. There are countless reasons to have occupants exit a vehicle and sit in our own patrol car. Lieutenant Colonel touched on some of them. Thinking of every possible scenario is going to be impossible. That being said, I can provide some specific examples if you'd like, or can discuss the applicable case law that allows a peace officer to order a person out of a vehicle if it pleases anybody in the committee.
Committee, any questions? I think we're good with what your testimony is there. I do have a question that one of you guys might be able to handle for me, and I was curious what your testimony was going to be. If we look at subsection B here on page 2 going into page 3, it says if a peace officer violates this section, the evidence of a crime discovered pursuant to this would not be able to do this. So I'm trying to think of a situation in which maybe there was a crash and an individual was subsequently asked, hey, would you like to come sit in the vehicle? And they admit to fault in the crash. Hey, yeah, I screwed up. I was going too fast and I did this. My understanding at this point, and I'm curious what your guys' interpretation, you guys are not the prosecutors, but your interpretation was that that would be inadmissible if it was gleaned in the circumstance that a person was brought in because it was cold outside. Is that correct?
My reading of this would be yes. When somebody's in our vehicle, what we're allowed to ask under case law is pretty narrowly tailored to the stop at hand, the underlying violation at hand, or it might be a crash to investigate the crash. And absent reasonable suspicion, the scope of our questioning should not deviate from that. If that answers your question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you. Any further questions? Yes, Representative Obermueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this bill is a little bit difficult to follow now with the amendment because it kind of switches the whole picture. So if you pictured this as the amendment passing, and now we're talking about entering one of the vehicles, and would it be appropriate to require a statement to the effect that they do not have to enter the vehicle and require that statement? Or what kind of issues or problems would that cause if we made it mandatory to say, in effect, you do not have to enter my vehicle?
Lieutenant?
Mr. Chairman, if a person was told they don't have to enter the vehicle, it would, back to the Lieutenant Colonel's example of multiple occupants and you smell the odor of an alcoholic beverage, a very simple way for us to tease that out. If the driver says, I'm the sober cab and these occupants are the ones that are intoxicated, I'm bringing them home, is to bring that person back to our vehicle. I can't think of a way with the open air and breeze to distinguish which individual the odor of alcohol is coming from unless they're in the confined environment of our car.
Thank you.
Any further questions for the Highway Patrol? Seeing none, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate it. Let's see Cheyenne PD and LCSO. Welcome, gentlemen. Please introduce yourself to the committee, and the floor is yours. Make sure it's green.
There, it's green now. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is David James. I'm a captain with Cheyenne Police Department. I've been with the police department for 20 years now and filled many, many roles within that police department where I've practiced and witnessed and taught different types of officer safety as well as public safety. And so that's where I'm going to try to focus a lot of my statements on today. And I'm very concerned with House Bill 120, even with the new amendment to it and the issues and the tools it takes away from us and our ability to keep others safe, the community safe. And we also think we're keeping the drivers safe in a lot of these instances and that option gets taken away, and that's important to remember. And so when we do it, the rules governing police officers' ability to remove and move occupants around a vehicle, it's been well established in our United States Supreme Court since 1977 in Pennsylvania versus Mims. And this is a perfect example of why this is important and the officer safety concerns our officers face every day. In 1977, the officers made a traffic stop for a license plate violation. The officers routinely removed occupants from the vehicle so that they could observe the occupant better. They could observe their hands, their body language, things like that that you can't see from a person sitting in their car. And as the person got out, they were able to see the bulge in the jacket where the guy was hiding his gun for nefarious purposes. And the Supreme Court, they actually pointed out at the time, a study that was done showed that 30% of officer-involved shootings take place, or officers shot, take place during traffic stops while the officer is walking up to the car. And so it's really important that officers have the ability to move occupants. A more recent study done between 2010 and 2016 by the Department of Justice, they looked at officers killed in the line of duty by gunfire. They separated them into two different sections. The first section you had was while on calls for service. The other one was while doing self-initiated activity. 56% of officers shot while doing self-initiated activity was during traffic stops. So our ability to control the individuals is so important to our safety as well as theirs. If there's not an officer involved shooting going on, the suspect's not getting shot either. If those things happen. And so the ability, if the officer feels the safest place for that individual is in their car, because maybe they think there's a gun in the car, or they think there's other things, or the driver says, we're in Wyoming. And I welcome it when someone says, I got a gun in my glove box. It's like, great, what type of gun? Cool, that's great to hear. Let's come back here where we're away from it and finish our traffic stop and move on with business. I think it's very important that officers have the ability to do that. And plus, just standing out on the roadway, I don't think is safe. Even in town, when I was a canine handler, I did a lot of stops and I helped highway patrol a lot on the highways. I don't know how they do it out there. Those semis buzzing by, you're taking your life into your own hands. And so moving that person into your car increases that safety. You can hear things much better, much faster. So this study was really fantastic by the DOJ. And also on it, on calls for service, the most dangerous call for service for officers is domestic violence. It's very regular for our officers to get dispatched to rolling domestics. Rolling domestics, domestic violence took place, the people got into a car. Or someone called in and said, hey, I saw this guy hitting this passenger, the woman in his passenger seat. Well, that gets us to reasonable suspicion. I think there's some confusion on reasonable suspicion and probable cause. That gets us to reasonable suspicion, which under Terry v. Ohio gives us the authority to stop that person, to ask some questions, to look into it a little bit further, not probable cause to make an arrest. And so when we deal with the domestic violence, it is absolutely critical that we are able to separate the suspect and the victim. When you look at the cycle of violence that's perpetuated, if you don't separate those people, the victims are oftentimes very, very intimidated by the suspect and will never tell you what's going on with that suspect there. And if you just then send them on their way, you're perpetuating that cycle of violence. And so it's extremely important for the officer to be able to bring that person out, and in weather or on the roadside things, it's always best in their car. And a lot of times for us, we will even go as far as, hey, we're in town, you want to just go down to the police department. And then we go down to the police department, and we get them stuff to make them feel more relaxed, especially victims. We put them in soft interview rooms. We work to get them services, victim services, all those sort of things, which under this bill, even with the change into the police car, because now we're removing occupants and asking them to get in our vehicles. And we can't do that. And it goes even further. Mr. Chairman, I think about, my last high-risk traffic stop was when I was a patrol sergeant. And what happened was we had reports of this individual around town shooting at vehicles and shooting into neighborhoods. And then all of a sudden we get a notice on the radio that he's now gotten into a gray Ford car and he's headed north on Logan, headed towards Nation Way, which is in Cheyenne. And almost immediately right afterwards, I see a gray Ford car turn west onto Lincoln Way with 4 passengers in it. And I know right away that's got to be the one. But I'm at reasonable suspicion. I'm not a probable cause. We have a third-party report at this point for officer safety. The last thing we want to do is do a traffic stop and walk up to the car. So with the help of 3 other cars, we stop the car. We perform a high-risk traffic stop, which is where we keep a safe distance from the car. We order each individual out of the car, bring them out, make sure they don't have firearms, then place them in our cars. And this keeps us safe. It keeps them safe. It keeps the public safe, drastically reducing the chance that anybody, including officers, civilians, the driver of the car, of injuries and death. And it makes things so much safer all the way around. And these are the considerations that we think about as we go to it. And we've obviously talked about DUIs and we've hammered DUIs. And this will really hamper the ability to do it, even with the amendment and the ability to request them to get into your car. On these days where it's an absolute blizzard out and you pull someone over and you smell alcohol, you can't do it roadside. We have a section in our police department where we can say, hey, let's head to the police department. We can do roadside maneuvers inside. Well, now I've just asked them into my car. I don't have probable cause yet to actually arrest them. I have reasonable suspicion to detain them for purposes of investigating the crime at hand, but not to go any further than that. And one thing too that was brought up multiple times, I made a quick note here when you talked about questions in the car and what could be, we need to talk about Miranda, Arizona versus Miranda, Miranda versus Arizona, is the fact that falls when you have a custodial interrogation. Okay, those two circumstances have to take place. So are they in custody? There's a lot of argument that on a traffic stop, a person's in custody. They don't feel free to leave. The questions asked cannot be an interrogation. So at what point are you being very incriminating in your questions you ask? So if you are interrogating them, then you need to read Miranda. I may have missed it in the bill, and I apologize if I did, but I don't see an exception for after you read Miranda is the evidence obtained excluded, because I think that would throw everything off, because we routinely make traffic stops where we want to interrogate the individual because we think a crime may have occurred. We may bring them back to our car, read them Miranda, and then ask them interrogating questions. And we're talking, I mean, just recently we've had homicides and stabbings and other things in Cheyenne where these people are then asked those sort of questions. We follow the procedure as outlined by the U.S. Supreme Court. Read Miranda, and I may be missing the exception in this, and I apologize if I am, but it really does change the officer's ability to investigate these crimes, keep themselves safe. And if you have questions on probable cause, reasonable suspicion, I did print out some legal descriptions to help you with that, but it's just a different level, a level of proof. You know, I mean, we can stop people if we suspect that crime is occurring, and we want to check it out and look further, but probable cause is a different level altogether. And I worry that if we're going to make that distinction at such a low level in a contact, that not only are we going to affect our investigations, but we're going to be strongly affecting the safety of the occupants of the vehicles we're stopping, the officers, and the community around them in those situations. So, Mr. Chairman and committee, I thank you for the time to speak with you. While I appreciate the intent of the bill, I really do, because all of us officers, trust and legitimacy is something I talk about all the time. And the only reason we have any authority to do our job is because we have trust and legitimacy of our community. Okay, we are fortunate to live where we serve by the consent of our governed. And that's really important. And so these things need addressed. And when people feel like something was wrong by being asked to come back to a car and things like that, we need to be able to have those conversations. I don't think it's needed in legislation, but we need to be able to have those conversations. So hopefully they understand it more, and hopefully we can hear one way. If we need to change our policies or address things internally on how officers handle these things or how we can better do it, we work together for it, but not necessarily by legislation. So I think, as the bill stands, my department cannot support it as it reads now, and we ask for a no vote unless significantly amended. The unintended consequences, even with the current amendment, cause too much increased risk to the public, occupants of the vehicles on stops, and officers. So I thank you for your time, and I stand for questions.
Committee, we are running short on time, so I am going to open it up for a few questions, but we'll ask for brevity from the next witnesses as well. But Representative Obermueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill comes with 10 legislators' names on it. The stories they tell aren't about DUI, aren't about child trafficking. They're normal citizens that support law enforcement. And yet here they come with this bill because they feel like there's something wrong with a normal situation, a normal person being pulled into a car, being asked inappropriate things. Have you given any thought to that issue of what is talked about and asked about and what's appropriate for just a regular citizen, the kind of people that are behind this bill?
Captain Jates.
Mr. Chairman and Representative, yeah, I very much appreciate that, and I can understand and I can empathize with that feeling. But normal citizens, everyday citizens, don't deal with the things that we deal with. Okay, I've been shot at my job. Okay, we deal with things like this. I'm not the only one at this table who's been shot at this job. We've had 2 of our sheriff's deputies actually hit within the last 12 months and amazingly have survived and are doing well. And these are sort of things that we have to deal with every day. The general everyday public hopefully never ever in their life has to make a a life or death decision in a spur of the moment. And unfortunately, in our career, it happens on a regular basis that our officers have to make these very critical, high-stress decisions. And so we need the ability to control the environment around us to keep everybody safe, so that when those decisions have to be made, when you have to pull off the highway very, very quickly to save the person who's in your passenger seat, it can be made because you have prepared mentally for those sort of things. The average citizen doesn't prepare for that every day. And that's why I think it's so important that these departments are responsive, because I absolutely agree. If someone felt like that, I would love to have a conversation with them and talk about procedure and talk about these situations and why it's there and those sort of things. We're obviously a little different than the Highway Patrol because our concentration safety within the city of Cheyenne, and yes, traffic's part of it. We typically on a traffic stop do not have our officers pull people back, but if there's a safety reason, absolutely, we say take them back. But when we investigate crimes during a traffic stop, there's a lot of reasons why, especially when it comes to separating witnesses and separating victims and suspects. And so I think that overweighs this concern of feeling like it's not right, even though it's been well established in the Supreme Court and upheld through multiple, even our own district has upheld it since 1977. So it's important, but I also think it's really important that the individual departments take that community responsibility and be ready to engage in that conversation.
Thank you, Captain. Let's go ahead and turn it over to Laramie County Sheriff's Office.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is Chance Walkman. I'm the Undersheriff of the Laramie County Sheriff's Department. I'll try to be brief and tailor this to the recent amendment. Criminals travel to and from crime scenes, and they carry evidence of crime in their vehicles they occupy. Further, they are not included to obey traffic laws. This means that effective traffic, law enforcement, and investigations can be the means of preventing, detecting, and intercepting crime. Limiting the ability to separate vehicle occupants will hinder the ability to conduct proper investigations of crimes that occur on our roadways. Crimes such as drug interdiction, drug crimes, DUI, which my colleagues have talked about several times, domestic violence, kidnapping, human trafficking are just some of the crimes that occur on our roadways. And being able to properly investigate these crimes does require drivers and passengers to exit the vehicle. And with the amendment, it also requires sometimes the ability to secure them in a police vehicle. And we ask that. We ask these occupants, do you mind, because there's 4 of you, if one of you sits in the back of my patrol car? That is a practice that we've used. And that's just to help us be safe and then maintain kind of the safety of our scene. So again, we've talked about like drug interdiction, separating people until we've developed probable cause to determine whether a crime has been committed or not. DUI enforcement, my colleagues, again, they've talked about domestic violence. Often when we separate folks, we finally get the story of what had happened. You know, the victim will talk about her abuser, whereas if we weren't able to separate them, weren't able to pull her back to the car, you know, get in a more safe environment where those doors are closed, would they give us that evidence that we would need to develop our probable cause for that arrest? I don't think so under this House bill. I'll give you an example of how human trafficking can be, this would impact human trafficking. And I cannot stress the importance of being able to separate parties. But several years ago, a gas station attendant reported to me that he had a truck driver traveling with a 5-year-old boy that had come through his business. The attendant couldn't put the words together, but said it appeared to be very suspicious. He had a hunch that something was wrong. As I approached the gas station, I observed the truck described by the attendant exit the parking lot and failed to stop at the stop sign before attempting to enter the interstate. I contacted the parent and spoke to the driver about the reason for the stop, which is again common practice. You know, and I stopped you because of, you know, you ran the stop sign. Can I get your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance? And in that time, I too developed a suspicion that something was not right between the relationship with the pair. So being able to separate those two and ask questions, I was able to determine that this 5-year-old boy had been kidnapped and he had been sexually assaulted by this individual for over 5 months. So being able to interfere and separate these two, again, we were able to solve this crime and stop the victimization of this child. So again, through the ability to request driver to exit the vehicle, separate and interview parties, further crimes we can stop. Being able to separate parties and conduct interviews is common practice and necessary practice to prevent, deter, and intercept crime. And thank you for your time, and I'm available for any questions.
Any questions? All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate your time. We're going to go ahead and open this up to public comment at this point. I will ask, I do have Representative Vice Chair Oakley has shown up. So my apologies, you were not here when we called for elected officials earlier, but Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly wanted to hear what law enforcement had to say first. So members of the committee, Ember Oakley, House District 55, but also a prosecutor, and that's really what I'm here using that experience. And I'm going to go fairly quickly if slow me down if I'm rapid firing, but there's several things I want to address. So first of all, it is already illegal to extend the stop beyond the reason, to extend the seizure beyond the reason for the stop. So this is already illegal. And I just pulled up looking at case law. I mean, it's all over in Wyoming law. One of the things that I'm seeing quite a bit of, we have a citizen legislature, and perhaps maybe not always fully understanding how different pieces of laws all fit together. We have a lot of case law that has developed over decades, sometimes hundreds of years. And in that way, we're getting into that. So when you're looking at reasonable suspicion, and one of the things I think this could do is basically just cut out this building of reasonable suspicion. And it's something that you kind of have to understand. There's different concepts of probable cause and then also what reasonable suspicion is. So I would say, think of reasonable suspicion as like walking upstairs. So at any point, if there's not another stair or there's not any more evidence, then at that point, the investigation is complete. It happens all the time. But also what happens if there is more evidence, then you keep building those stairs. If you take away this ability at investigating because of reasonable suspicion, you're expecting somebody to go, a law enforcement officer, to go from the base and jump up that they already have probable cause that a crime has occurred. And so it's understanding what this reasonable suspicion is, which is really important in traffic, specifically in traffic stops. So again, using a DUI. So they pull somebody over for a traffic offense. They think they smell alcohol. The next thing they're going to do is probably, ask them some questions. Again, they're either building reasonable suspicion because somebody is committing a crime, reasonable suspicion that a crime is afoot, or again, they might be finding out that there is not. They're doing both ways, right? They're investigating. So they ask questions, then they have them get out of the vehicle. Then the number one used, it was testified to already, NHTSA, it's very reliable, is using SFSTs, field sobriety tests. And they're very good at ascertaining whether somebody is under the influence of something. And again, with traffic safety, all this stuff, they might also have them in the car where they can also isolate and smell if there's alcohol. They're going to do that after they already are building this reasonable suspicion. It doesn't yank somebody out of a car and get in my vehicle. That's not how it works. But so I think that's important to understand. So I just wanted to talk about you're hampering reasonable suspicion, the building of reasonable suspicion and the ability to investigate is just a tough step. And I don't see any need for it. I guess that's another thing I'd like to discuss is I don't see the need for this. Again, it is in case law that an officer cannot extend the stop. So we've heard discussion that, they were talking, if let's say they're running your license plates or your registration or something. So they're still within that purview. They might just visit with you. But if they are still not investigating something, or if they're just running after they run your license, if you're speeding, once that is given back to you, the stop is over. And if not, that is an impermissible stop. And then again, it happens in case law all the time. So it's already impermissible for them to extend the reason of the stop unless they're building this reasonable suspicion or have probable cause. So the law is already actually pretty good around this. And in a way, just coming in with a legislative wrench is the way I see it. I did want to discuss, you were talking about open-ended questions. Again, unless they're actually still investigating, they can't just be asking random questions. And you also said inappropriate. And I do want to push back a little bit, Representative Obermuller, as far as because 10 people signed on to this bill, that means they all have had a personal experience, because I can speak from putting legislator hat back on. I've signed on to all sorts of bills. That doesn't mean I have personal experience. And I certainly don't see this. And I work with a lot of law enforcement that they're just putting people in their vehicles without this legal method that they legally have the person in the car. He already talked about Miranda. That was kind of discussed. I don't know if it's how relevant it is, but that is custody plus interrogation, which you're not in custody if you just go into somebody's car. I don't know if there's any questions about that. So that's rapid fire. I think our law is already replete, is already clear in this area. It's been hammered out in case law, which is how that happens. And I don't think this is necessary, nor I think it can be harmful. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions.
Any questions for Vice Chairman Oakley? Seeing none. Okay. I do know that we have a few other people out there. Public comment. I will ask for brevity yet again. Sir, please come on up, introduce yourself. Oh, wait till you're at the microphone. Awesome, thank you, sir.
Yeah. Is it good? I'm Zeke Zwanitzer. So last August, I was in Laramie. I was coming home from a grad party with one of my buddies. And so we stopped at a couple truck stops to look for some snacks because we were hungry. And we went to one, didn't find anything, went to another one, found something, and then we started driving down like it's that road behind the campus. And so there was this Tahoe following me, and I just didn't really mind it much. And it was like probably for like maybe like 5 to 10 minutes, something around that. And then I was just driving, and then his lights flick on, and I'm like, oh, okay, I don't know what I did. So I pull over, and then he walks up to my car, and he says, do you know why I pulled you over today? And I'm like, I don't know, officer. Yeah. And so he's like, you were going 5 miles over, and he's like, license, registration, does all that, goes to his car, comes back. He's like, so I'm gonna write you a warning, and I'm gonna have you come step out of your car and sit in mine. And while I'm in his car, he was asking, like, he's like, so were you drinking the night? I'm like, I just said no. I'm like, were you into drugs or in narcotics in the car or anything like that? And I say no. And then the weird question was what he's asking, like, do you have any kidnapped victims or like anyone in your trunk? And I'm like, no. And I'm just sitting here uncomfortable because like I can understand like he thought I was drinking because I shake a lot when I'm driving because I take medications. So it's so I kind of like move the car a little bit. So I'm pretty sure that's why he asked. But it was just I don't see the reason for me to step out of my car because I'm 18. I'm just coming home from a grad party. I don't see any suspicious reason why I'm doing anything wrong. So, yeah.
Any questions for Mr. Zwanitzer? Seeing none, thank you so much. Appreciate you showing up. Mr. Lindholm, please introduce yourself to the committee.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for having me. I'm Tyler Lindholm, State Director for Wyoming's chapter of Americans for Prosperity, which is a conservative grassroots organization. Wyoming's the 36th state to have a chapter in it. I wanted to touch on this legislation. Americans for Prosperity is in favor of this legislation. Not for any of the scary reasons of not being able to investigate or anything like that. In fact, I think that the legislation actually already covers that probable cause provisions as is stated on page 2, lines 2 through 6. I think it handles that probable cause provisions as far as being suspected of committing a crime, and it lays it out pretty well. But I did want to talk about peace officer safety is obviously pretty paramount. Wyoming's roads are often desolate and you're alone out there. And so that peace officer safety is an important part of it, but also is protecting rights of the individual. We live in a republic. There's a reason why you're making the laws and the individual sitting directly behind me enforce the laws. They do not write the laws, the citizens write the laws. And so when you're balancing those constitutional rights, those inherent rights that we all have, I do think it's important that a check is put in place from time to time to ensure that those rights are being protected. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Lindholm? Mr. Lindholm, welcome back to the Capitol. Thanks. We know how much you love Cheyenne, sir. Any further testimony? I do. Ms. Hall?
Good afternoon,
Lance,
Mr.
thank you.
Chairman. Beth Lance. I'm here on behalf of the Wyoming Child Lawyers Association. Our comments are very similar to what you just heard from Mr. Lindholm. We are supportive of this bill. We see it as an attempt to balance citizens' rights and officer safety both, particularly with the amendment. From what we've heard from law enforcement today, there are very valid reasons for people to be requested to step out of their car. But I think it goes quite a bit step further when you are then requesting citizens to be placed into the officer's cruiser for what we've heard typically ends up being a lot of additional questioning, sometimes of which goes beyond, it seems, the stop. So I appreciate this bill being brought. I think it raises a wonderful conversation. Again, we are supportive of the amendment. I think that greatly improves the bill. And again, if you just continue to have this conversation, WTLA would appreciate continuing to be part of that and potentially any other amendments to make this good legislation. And I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lance. Any questions? Representative Obermueller?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The testimony we heard were a few anecdotal instances of what was considered inappropriate questioning going too far. Would you characterize it broader than just anecdotal in the state of Wyoming? Is there a trend involving this that we should deal with?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Overmiller. I don't know if I would necessarily say there's a trend, but certainly attorneys who work in this area of the law all have a story to tell. We certainly have all encountered these kinds of cases in our work. And so it definitely exists, I guess, is what I can say to that.
Thank you, Ms. Lance. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Public comment in the room? I don't have anybody in the room. I know I do have a couple online. I'm going to pick out, I'm going to start the 3-minute timer. We do have one more bill I'd like to try to get to, but I don't think we're going to get to it today. If you can please let in Mr. Peterson. Mr. Peterson, when you're let in, all you need to do is turn on your microphone and your camera.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Can you hear me and see me?
We're good.
Thank you. And I've got my timer going as well, and I will stay within the 3 minutes. I am a Wyoming attorney. I applaud Representatives Wanader and Andrew and the others that bring this bill. And I do see the cases that I see are cases in which a law enforcement officer brings someone back for having stopped them for nothing other than a taillight out, following too closely, other very minor traffic violations, in the hopes of doing a criminal investigation for whatever their hunch might be. And that's exactly the type of law enforcement activity that our Constitution is meant to prohibit. And we've heard today that law enforcement does not ask everyone back to their vehicles. And so that raises the question, who are you bringing back and who are you not bringing back and why? And you know, I've never been asked back into a police officer's car or vehicle, and other people have for very minor traffic violations. And I think that what this bill tries to do, and maybe it doesn't do it perfectly, and maybe there's ways to amend this bill to prevent this type of activity, but it's trying to prevent those intimidating conversations. We heard from law enforcement that they don't do this specifically to intimidate, but it's intimidating and it's uncomfortable. We've heard from a legislator in the Wyoming legislature who felt intimidated, and one of the panel asked why didn't you just plead the fifth? And we're talking about a legislature who knows his rights, presumably, and we're talking about enforcing those or choosing to invoke those rights in that moment, in that heated, intense moment. Imagine someone who is much less familiar with their rights, much less likely to enforce those. And we do see these conversations go into impermissible areas, even without legislator, into other activity. And this is a huge issue all across the country. I think, the judiciary tries to deal with it, but I think it is appropriate for the legislature to try to impose limits to stop and prevent arbitrary enforcement of power about which citizens will and will not be brought back into a police officer's car for a very minor traffic violation, to further an investigation on what is often a hunch based on who knows what criteria. And I see my 3 minutes are up.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Appreciate your time. Any questions for Mr. Peterson? Representative Stivar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you think it's a training issue with law enforcement?
I don't know. I think the honest, I do, and I appreciate law enforcement, and I know that they get shot at, and it's safety concerns, and I don't, and I appreciate that they're out there in the line of fire. But what I see is traffic stops being utilized in order to try to investigate other crimes, mostly drugs that I've seen. I haven't had a child trafficking case, but I think the policy is to try to find and make traffic stops for minor traffic violations in order to further investigations for other crimes that they don't have reasonable suspicion for. So I think that is the policy. That's my understanding, is that's what they're doing the traffic stop for, is not necessarily for the traffic stop, but for that further investigation. So I don't know. I don't think we can rely on a policy to stop this type of conduct.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. With that, committee, I am going to close public comment. I am going to try to give Representative Henderson a few minutes here to at least explain his bill. I doubt we'll get to it all the way through, but at least explain it, and then we'll continue it through. So with that, we're going to close public testimony. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I guess just gentlemen, I think we've heard very extreme sides on both sides of this argument. I'll go ahead and leave this to the committee's pleasure. Representative Nemec.
Mr. Chairman, a motion that we table this bill indefinitely.
Okay, there's a motion and a second to table indefinitely. That is a non-debatable motion. So with that, Diana, would you please call roll?
Representative Berger,
Aye.
Representative Nemec,
Aye.
Representative Obermuller,
No.
Representative O'Hearn,
Aye.
Representative Pendergraft,
Aye.
Representative Smith,
Aye.
Representative Stivar,
Aye.
Representative Wiley,
Aye.
Chairman Brown.
Aye.
8 ayes, 1 no.
Sure. So that bill is tabled. Representative Zwanitzer, Chairman Zwanitzer, thank you for your time. Thank you to everybody who has testified. Chairman Zwanitzer, I do think that this might be worthy of a topic for interim discussion. I think having multiple discussions on this and seeing the value of both sides of this would be something worth looking into in the future. Thank you. Representative Obermuller, do you have a point of privilege?
Yeah, privilege, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
The issue of the 10 people that signed this bill as co-signers, what I'd like to say to you about that and to tell the public, co-signers have a responsibility to understand the bill, to understand the reason why the person brought the bill, and to only co-sign if they feel qualified to go up and talk about and defend the bill. So the idea that these names on here didn't mean anything, I just wanted to let the public know that co-signing is a very important responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Obermuller. All right. Representative Henderson, we have about 10 minutes. I think we might go just a little bit if we're moving along on this bill. But I would like to at least give you the floor to introduce your bill. And then if worse comes to worse, what we will ultimately do is move this over and extend it into Thursday if needed. but I'd like to at least have you, and I know you brought somebody along with you to give the testimony as available. Representative Henderson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Real quick, I want to allow as much time as possible to Mrs. Janelle Jones, who's a mother of a young child that was unfortunately killed in a crosswalk over at one of our schools. But very briefly, I bring you House Bill 68, and I thank you for the opportunity to hear it. This bill is about safety. It's a good place to start. And frankly, I think we can all agree that there's a lot from each one of us that we bring to the table, as the good representative just said. And so it's built on the basis of the model used a couple of years ago for folks going around stop school buses. And that was because there were thousands of people going around stop school buses. And we have a growing population, and we have a need for safety all over the place. And so what this does is it uses that model, and I've worked with the department. I'm very thankful to them. I did send out earlier this session, so everyone would have this. It's a data, you want to manage with data. And this tells the various cities and towns in our state where we've had several pedestrians involved in crashes in contact with a vehicle. And so having said that, I think, Mr. Chairman, your suggestion of moving it forward is a good one. But I'd like to allow Ms. Jones the opportunity to speak to the committee.
Please, Ms. Jones, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I want to first introduce myself. I am the mother of McKiley Evans. He's better known as Mac here in our community. Just wanted to show you a photo of him. Mac was a fun and loving, charismatic 13-year-old kid, and he was tragically killed on a crosswalk in front of McCormick Junior High on November 5th of 2021. I believe that God is using my pain for a purpose. I started a nonprofit for Mac in honor of Mac to bring awareness as well as raise funding to assist the Laramie County School District No. 1 and the City of Cheyenne in upgrading the crosswalks and school zones right here in Cheyenne. I volunteer and I am dedicated to several hours a week as a crossing guard. It has given me a new perspective on the issues we face, not only as a parent, but as a community member. Speeding and distracted driving are the main issues that I am seeing. I brought this idea in front of the Joint Judiciary Committee this past November, as driver behavior seems to be more problematic than the pedestrians, which are the children in this instance, going to and from school. I asked if we could consider an automated speed enforcement cameras in school zones, as I feel that this would be a win-win solution, as the cameras would correct driver behavior, that knowing upon entering a school zone that they were either going to have a citation or that the drivers would either slow down or take a different route. The result, it would be a safer school zone. Our junior highs are relatively close to our high schools, and I've witnessed a lot of young speed offenders. This would also create the opportunity for parents to educate their young drivers and be notified if their young drivers were driving carelessly or speeding in school zones. I also believe that the revenue generated from the citations received would be profitable in helping our community in upgrading our crosswalks and our Safe Route to School program plan, to pay for the equipment as well as the admin fee to process or maintain and mail citations. I have learned a lot in this past year in terms of costs for upgrading crosswalks and the lighting systems, but this is only part of the solution. Correcting driver behavior is the other part. Pedestrian deaths, like my son's, are 100% preventable with education, safer equipment, and enforcement. In Cheyenne, we have 36 schools in Laramie County School District No. 1. 32 of those schools are within city limits. This does not include our private schools. We currently have 4 traffic enforcement officers. They are stretched thin. This bill would not only support, this bill is not to replace them, but it would support them. There's just no way that they can be in all places at once. And I have talked to them on numerous occasions. I appreciate their efforts in doing all that they can, but we need to support them in some other way. This bill would have drivers on, this bill would be another way to have drivers on the honor system, or they would be cited. This is how we correct driver behavior and prevent another death. We need to have a zero tolerance policy in our school zones for speeding and distracted driving. YDOT commented last week during Senate File 35 bill that the age group of pedestrians most at risk of being killed by a driver is the age of 14 and younger. As crushing as it is for me to say this, my 13-year-old son was one of 12 pedestrians killed in 2021. We must do better as a state and try and come up with solutions to this growing problem. I personally am dedicated to doing all I can to protect the children going to and from school. As these crosswalks are utilized daily, I just want to say now that I stand behind Representative Henderson and support this bill for our children, for our community, and for my son, Mac. I graciously ask you to do the same thing today. Thank you, and I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Jones, for your time. Give me just a second. I just want to say thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here, number one, and let me express my condolences. This was the first year that I was able to stand out and stand at a crosswalk for Mac as well. So I was able to do that over by Anderson Elementary.
That
and it
means
was-
a lot. Thank you so much.
So thank you for coming to the committee today. Committee, I have at least one question, Representative Obermueller.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for your activism on this issue. I was just wondering if this bill could be improved by requiring, in addition to the surveillance, requiring signage that said this area is surveilled.
Absolutely. And I did suggest that to the Joint Judiciary Committee, that I do believe that this should be, I mean, I think it should be full disclosure. I think that on the flashing lights, as you're entering a school zone, it should say that there are cameras enforcing the area between the hours of 7 and 4 p.m. when the lights are flashing.
Thank you.
Vice Chair O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The biggest pushback that I've had from my 463 emails that I got on this was showing the pictures of the surrounding houses. Is there any rule that we couldn't put these up on the opposite side? And it would be a better video, I would assume, proving that it was in front of a school.
I agree.
Certainly, Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the question. There's a lot that we need to work on this. You know where we start, right? And we have a couple of proposed amendments along those lines in terms of, it's not just about having the video system up there. It's about having the ability to understand what the rules are promulgated by the people who enforce them to help everyone in every community. That's certainly a valid point.
Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very sensitive to your loss. I can't imagine what that would be like. And I very much commend you for taking some action on that and for volunteering your time in the crosswalks. And my driving back and forth to work, I go through a couple of school zones all the time, and I see inattention, carelessness, and it does bother me. My question, though, has to do with, as you were prepared for or trained for working the crosswalk, did they tell you anything about the Wyoming laws regarding citizen's arrest? And I know you can't go down and run out and stop a moving car, but you can file complaints. Was that a part of your training?
No, it was not. But I have taken down plate numbers. I have reported to the authorities when there has been clear. I mean, there's been a couple of near misses where I've almost been hit on the crosswalk trying to get children across the street. So it is a growing problem. And no, there was not a whole lot of training on that, but I do the best I can.
Any further questions for Ms. Jones or Representative Henderson at this point? All right, committee, it is exactly 2 o'clock. We are gaveling back in. So Representative Henderson, my apologies that we had a lot of testimony on the other bill. We will continue this. You will be first up on Thursday. And we will hear this. Director Reiner, I'm sure you probably have some information. We'll see you first thing on Thursday as well. Thank you. And committee, we're adjourned for the afternoon.